there's all sorts of things I should tell you first. So the toilets are out that door, and the men's toilets are around that side, and they've got great food here. But what happens is we'll have a break and there'll be a huge rush for food. So down on the big round table down the end, you can pre-order a meal if you want it. That's just one thing, bit of housekeeping, is that what you call it? And there's a program outside. Dr. Deb will speak first, then I'll put Leah on. And it's a bit loose, the program, because I've got quite a few people who are using medical cannabis who want to tell their stories briefly. So I'll just sort of squeeze them in where I can. I've actually got lots of people. But you'll be able to talk to people privately outside also. So any of the people who are talking today, pretty much they're hanging around most of the day, if not all the day. You can catch them outside, talk to them yourself personally if you want. There's an ABC journalist here who is interested to talk to an older person who's maybe been using cannabis but had chronic pain. Anyone interested in doing that should stick their hand up or talk to me in a sec. It would be good to have a couple of good people to talk to her. She's doing a feature story on treating, especially chronic pain, but elderly people using cannabis instead of opiates especially. Half the people that come here looking for medical cannabis are trying to get off opiates or get some medication that doesn't have so many big side effects. There's a couple of other things I thought I should tell you about too. We've started a Weed Billboards campaign you can donate to. There's a website, weedbillboards.com. We've also got a couple of court cases happening trying to challenge saliva testing. Saliva testing's a big problem for us. I've been in Edinburgh more than 30 years, but some people have been here more than 40 years. And a lot of us came here because we use cannabis. And I didn't discover cannabis till I was 24, and I had problems, and it was an immediate, great kind of restful medicine for me, really, if you'd say. I haven't drunk much alcohol since. I've found cannabis does the job for me. And there's hundreds of people on the North Coast, thousands of people who are a bit like me, who discovered, mine was a PTSD thing. And I think other people have asthma, or people have nervous disorders or anxiety disorders or serious stuff like Crohn's or Parkinson's, and they discover cannabis can be like magic. It is just a herb, it is just a plant, and I would urge people to look up the history of the plant, because 200 years ago it was probably the most grown plant on earth. It makes this is all hemp clothing, it makes the strongest fibre, hemp rope. The word canvas comes from cannabis. It's got an extraordinary long, flexible, strong fibre. So the cotton industry, which has caused that big fish kill pretty much last week, I would give a fair bit of that to the cotton industry. Hemp does the job better. The catch is it takes more processing, which costs more money. So when they invented the cotton gin I think it's in the 1860s or something, everyone moved to cotton. But before then it was all hemp. The paper was all hemp, the clothing was hemp. Interesting. So it's really all about economics. Same with hemp seed. Hemp seed only became legal in Australia last year, but it's a superfood. Super nutritious, high in omegas. There's some out there you can try today if you haven't ever tried it. It's a total superfood. It's on the shelves in Woolworths now, I think, but we'll hear a lot more about it. Again, it's been made illegal for other industries to profit. So it was a kind of, hippies like me have been learning about cannabis and the war on drugs for 40 years. And the war on drugs is just a war on certain drugs. And essentially it's nature's best painkillers. The cannabis plant, the opium poppy, and the coca plant, which makes cocaine. These are probably the best three painkillers on earth. So you make them illegal and you control the global cannabis pain relief market. I reckon that's the most profitable business on earth. How many people here have sold their house to access pain relief? So You know, think about it. It's actually simple. You know, I get sick of hearing politicians say, "Oh, it's so complicated." You know, we'll have endless meetings and work out what to do. It's bullshit. It's just about money and profit making. So the pharmaceutical industry really write the doctor's course for university now. You don't learn anything about plants. It's all about, you learn about the ailment, and the treatment is a pharmaceutical product. No one learns about plants. Plants are like an enemy. It's very interesting if you can sit back from it. It is just a fight over who's going to make the most money from our sicknesses. It's sick. It's a sick business. What was I going to tell you about now? The saliva testing cases are coming up in court. Australia cannot, no one can introduce a meaningful medical cannabis program while we're not allowed to drive. I've been busted, nearly everyone here in Nimbin who smokes cannabis has been busted now for driving. I've got a perfect driving record. I actually think it makes me a safer driver. I'm more relaxed, I'm focused. So there's a lot of misinformation around about druggies driving. You know, anyone on pharmaceuticals, including all the opioids, is not tested for driving. You know, driving should be about impairment. I remember coming to a roundabout with my old man who was on a handful of pharmaceuticals, and we get to the roundabout and he stopped and goes, "Mike, I've forgotten where we're going." And it's like, you know, they took his licence away soon after, but it's like, it should be about impairment, and that's an issue we feel strongly about here. And Steve Bold, the lawyer, will be talking later, and you'll hear a bit more about it. It's kind of a, you know, it's a bit nature versus chemicals, you'll find in Nimbin, and it's not as simple as that, and I'm not anti-chemicals, and I'm not anti the pharmaceutical industry either. I think there's a lot of good stuff there. Doctors do some great things, but to make all of us criminals and make anyone using natural pain relievers a criminal is just a shocking thing. You know, the jail, there's 2 million people in jail in America. I'm not sure how many in Australia, but the arrest rates for cannabis is staying up. There's no sign of it going down. We have 9 permanent police in Nimbin. All of our one street is live to the cop shop. And they just hunt people the whole time. So, you know, we're sick of it. We've learned to be a bit more patient with it. But the Hemp Embassy is solely about trying to educate people to change the laws. Pill testing is a no-brainer, but I think it's a side issue from the big issue, really. I told you about ordering food down there. There's another thing around the side here. Is one of Nimbin's best attractions. It's a candle factory set up 40-odd years ago. And I love that they dip the candles using water pressure. So when we've got a big crowd here and there's no parking, it's hard for them to get anyone in there. So I told them that they're very nice people. I'd tell that to you. If you feel like it, wander around that side of... You're in the old butter factory, which, you know, when the hippies came to Nimbin in 1973, the town was pretty much closed because the dairying industry had closed down. So, you know, it's been what's given us strength. That we were able to buy 4 or 5 big buildings in town and people bought this old butter factory. So hippies have got their roots in deep and we're not leaving. Which, you know, might be interesting for some of you. I've got a rough program of Dr. Deb, who I'll introduce you to now. And then Sue, I've got the local Green candidate who's going to talk a bit. And she's a local girl, I know her well. She's terrific. And she will... The Greens have got a bill in federal parliament now to regulate cannabis use, and I actually think it's excellent. And although I'm in the Hemp Party, we're going to be big supporters of the Greens thing. So I will have various announcements for you today. This is Disco Sista.
Oh, hello.
She does the PA and will interrupt and say good things all day. We're going to be trying to be not too, you know, formal. Feel free to ask questions, and feel free especially to talk to people outside. There's Radical, near the sand pits up that end, there will be people showing you how to extract herbs. There will be people, there's Morocco there who's hand weaving 100% hemp in Cambodia into beautiful material. Have a look. And there's a lot of hemp seed. You can actually, they're extracting from fresh leaves. Fresh leaves is a whole thing no one's hardly discovered in Australia, but when, and I'm confident in, within hopefully not more than a decade, we'll be allowed to grow a few plants in our backyard, and then you'll be able to put some leaves in your juice you make or your smoothie. And in America and Canada, we're finding that's got huge health benefits. So I won't keep rabbiting on. This is Dr. Deb Waldron. She's come to these meter cans regularly for quite a while, and an experienced cannabis user, I would say. Someone who's struggled with pain a lot in her life, and she's now studying herbalism. So she's got the best of both worlds. I really appreciate that, Dr. Deb.
I think I do too. Thank you, Michael. Good morning, Nimbin. I've always wanted to do that. I think I'm supposed to be using this mic.
Which mic do you want to use?
I'll sit down and do this one, but now I've just got to figure out this thing yet.
Deb's just getting at the slideshow, and while she's doing that, I just want to say there may be a man putting a metal thing on the stage. Don't be alarmed, it's to do with cannabis. It's how we make oil. We're going to demonstrate at the stage, so you'll see the machinery.
Down there? Is that okay? Can we hear?
Yep.
Okay. So, this is a pretty basic talk today.
You can run, you sit there and just relax.
Oh, okay. This is a really basic talk today. And the first question I usually ask is, how many of you, is it your first time here to Nimbin? Okay. So, we tend to revisit things a lot. So for those who know all of this stuff, well, I've put in a few funny cartoons to keep you happy. But basically it's a fairly standard basic talk, talking about cannabis the plant.
Feel free to have a smoke if you want.
Yep, of course you are. Okay, so cannabis species. A most beautiful lady. And anyone who's seen the plant growing, especially a tall sativa waving in the wind, there's nothing more graceful. So she is indeed a beautiful plant. And this is a standard botanical drawing of Cannabis sativa, characterised, as you can see, by the long thin leaves, and it shows both male and female plants, and that's a standard drawing that you will see in any botanical book. Yep. So first of all, we're just going to have a quick botany lesson. Cannabis species. Now, a lot of you will know how plants are classified, but a lot don't, and basically all things are classified into the animal and plant kingdom, and then it goes down from there. Being a flowering plant, it's what we call an angiosperm, so it's in that phyla, and the next order down is the Rosale order, which is actually the rose family, or the rose order. Now, there's not very many species within the Cannabinaceae family, which is the family to which cannabis belongs. The only other ones that we really know of commonly would be hops, the family the genus that is hops, which is Humulus, and hackberry. And I can't remember the Latin name for that. But so basically there are a couple more, there are a few rare plants in the world that do contain cannabinoids, but the vast majority are within the genus Cannabis. And there is a lot of conjecture now, a lot of controversy. There's the origins of the plant itself really just goes back into the mists of time. I mean, we're fairly certain it came from Asia or around there initially, but it filtered through the whole world, so that the origins of sativa, for example, or the psychoactive sativa that was smoked in California in the 70s, seems to have come from South America. And yet we know sativa as being an industrial hemp. So even figuring out how sativa species got to be psychoactive is an interesting question, and I'm sure if John Jiggins is around, he'd be able to tell me a few things about that. But basically, an indica was so named because they thought it originated in India, and that generally was the medicinal type of cannabis. So we have three species. We have sativa, indica, and the little poor cousin of those two called ruderalis, and that did originate in Russia. And really it's just a short, bushy little shrub that doesn't really do very much, but is actually now really quite sought after to cross with other types of cannabis to gain the features that ruderalis has. So it's sort of coming back into its own a little bit. But most of the time we will just discuss sativa and indica. And as people say, oh, you can't even do that. Well, yeah. We can, because that's technically the two species, but there are hundreds of cultivars. So the best way when you're looking at what your strain is or whatever, that name is its cultivar. If it's a registered strain, you're allowed to put inverted commas around it. If it's not registered, you're not. And that's really it. And so when you see, so if you buy Amnesia Haze or you grow Amnesia Haze, its full name is from the Cannabinoids family, and it's Cannabis sativa, because a haze is a sativa, Amnesia Haze. And it's a registered strain, so you're allowed to put the things around it. So that's basically how you name cannabis. Any questions? So it's a flowering plant, as you probably knew. It can take between 8 and 16 weeks to reach maturity, depending on, well, sativas are known to take longer than indica strains. So every strain is different, every species is different. But roughly that's the time. The plant can be either male, female, or hermaphrodite. So if you're wanting to grow cannabis for seed, then you want to have both sexes there so that seeds will form. However, if you're growing a medical or recreational cannabis, the last thing you want is seeds. So that's why, if you've heard the term they use feminized plants, is to make sure by treating the seeds that those feminized plants grow from with things like colloidal silver, you force them into only being female. And so then you grow from a feminized plant, so you will be guaranteed only females. If you have males appearing on the same plant as the female, it's a hermaphrodite, and it's not considered a very good thing for anybody growing cannabis. You don't really want that. So they tend to try and keep things fairly separate depending on what you want the plant for. Really complicated, isn't it? And we've only just begun. Because the plant actually contains, hundreds of phytochemicals. And phytochemicals are what are the things, the chemicals in plants that have some activity. So over 140 different cannabinoids alone have been identified so far. And as I've said, the cannabinoids are not found really in any great quantity in any other plants. But they just don't contain cannabinoids. They also contain phytochemicals common to many plants, like terpenes, flavonoids, alkaloids, phytosterols. We could keep going. I mean, it really is a pretty amazing plant. Oh, this is just to keep the rec smokers happy. Someone got it. Thank you, thank you. I was pretty good myself. Grind control to Major Bong. And don't worry, these charts are really just in here for your edification. This talk will be on a USB, and if you would like it, I will leave it at the Hemp Embassy, and you can just copy it from there with your own USB, and I'm sure Michael will be happy to do that. So basically, this is just a quick list of some of the cannabinoids that are in the cannabis plant. Most of us heard of THC and CBD. In the plant themselves, though, they don't exist as THC and CBD. They exist in an inactive form. And there's a few things that do this. The enzymes in our pancreas are the same. If they existed in an active form, they'd eat our pancreas away, so they have to exist in an inactive form until they get to the bowel. And it's much the same with the cannabis plant. Because of the amazing bioactivity of these cannabinoids, they can't be active in the plant, they must be inactive. Though they still do retain health benefits. And so in order to activate them, you have to heat them. And in doing so, it knocks off a little bit of the THC or CBD molecule and it makes it active. We call that process decarboxylation. Or in the, the oil makers says you decarb. So anytime you hear someone say, oh, is it decarbed? That's what they mean. Has it been heated to make it active? So in the plant it exists in the acid form. So it's acid THC, acid CBD, etc. Generally though, unless we're wanting to make that distinction for treatment, really we just assume that it has been decarboxylated and is activated. And of course, the bud that you can get is not active. That's why you have to smoke it to get stoned. If you ate it, it would not have the same effect. If you heated that bud in the oven for, 150 degrees for an hour and then smoked and then ate it, yes, you'd get stoned because you've decarboxylated it that way. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? I'm not going to go into any sorts of extraction processes or anything. There's plenty of other people to do that today. This is just for those newcomers to give everyone just a brief overview of how much there is, really, how hugely complicated the subject is, and just what an amazing plant it actually is. And here I've put a chart of terpenes for you, so that people can have a look at that and see that terpenes themselves have medicinal activity. So it's not just the cannabinoids that are the medical things in this plant, the terpenes are as well. And the terpenes are what gives the cannabis its characteristics. That means I'm talking about the external characteristics like the smell, the taste, and it has some effect in deciding the type of stone or the type of high. So cannabis without terpenes would be very boring cannabis. So terpenes are important not only because it makes the weed what it is, but they also have their own health benefits. So this is part of the problem when we talk about isolates from cannabis, is that we're removing not just other cannabinoids, but we're removing all the goodies like terpenes and flavonoids. Flavonoids in every plant everywhere are excellent antioxidants. So we don't want to get rid of those either. So, and that's why when we look at our extraction process, we like to retain all of the whole plant properties. So again, I'm not going to go through that in detail. And it's not just medicine either. I mean, this plant, as Michael touched on, is an amazing food. I forgot to put it on there, but you can juice it for a start. It's a wonderful green smoothie. Well, perhaps not the taste, but I'm not fond of any green smoothies. But yeah, it's definitely juiceable, and it is just an excellent way to boost your endocannabinoid system, and we'll get to that in a moment. So juicing the whole plant's great. You get everything. But you also have the seeds, and the seeds are just amazing. The protein in the seeds is a complete protein. Now, that doesn't matter for us omnivores that will graze on anything, but for those that are vegetarian and especially vegan, it is very important to know your sources of complete protein. The egg, if you're vegetarian, is a complete protein, but we don't really have very many others. Soy almost gets there. Quinoa is a complete protein, and so a hemp seed. And that means that they contain all of the essential amino acids that our body can't make for itself. So it is indeed a superfood. And not only that, not only is it a complete protein, but the oil in the seeds contains omega-3 and omega-6s in a ratio that's actually found within the cell membrane in the body. So while there are people that will say, oh my God, it's got omega-6 in it and that makes inflammation. Yeah, correct, too much omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. It will cause inflammation. But like with everything in the body, it has to be in balance and it has to be in a ratio. And indeed, this is what hemp oil is. It's in this wonderful ratio of about 3:1, omega-6 to omega-3, and it also has a little bit of omega-9 just to complete the picture. So as far as food goes, it's an amazing plant. And then, I mean, then you can move beyond the medicinal and the food value. I mean, it's a cellulose crop, so it can be used to produce ethanol as a fuel. The characteristics of the hemp fibre make it ideal for building textiles and paper. Cannabis is a bioaccumulator. That means that it can clean your soil. There are other crops that do that. Legumes are also quite good at cleaning soil, but they can also leach the soil in other ways. But cannabis is definitely a bioaccumulator and can clean your soil. There is a word of caution with that, though, because as you can imagine, all the soil in our world is pretty shitty by now. So that's why you probably need to be a little careful when you buy CBD oil, because if it's grown from a industrial hemp with very low amounts of CBD, even though it hasn't got much THC, it doesn't have much CBD either, then an enormous amount has to be harvested to get the yield. So the chance of contaminants finding their way into that CBD is actually quite high. So it's just a word of caution. Cannabis is a bioaccumulator. If you want to grow your first cannabis crop and it hasn't had anything grow on it since the 1970s and they've used dildrin and DDT and God knows what, then you'll be wanting to throw away that first cannabis crop, won't you? But then you'll know that at least it's cleaning your soil. So that's just a little pro and con thing of it being a bioaccumulator. And it actually requires roughly 2/3 less water than to grow cotton. There are other crops that aren't as water hungry as cotton. And it's not just the water that cotton uses, it's also the amount of chemicals that are used in its growing. And of course hemp at this point does not require the same amount of chemical to grow it. Though I think we have to be realistic, is if we're growing anything in huge amounts, then we're going to have to deal with disease and pests, because we're changing a natural ecosystem into one that's what we want rather than what nature says. So growing organic is not easy. So even this is just a really basic information, you know, but I mean it's really clear to see that the plant is just unique. Any questions? Yes?
I'm just going back a little bit, Dr. Deb. You know, you're saying heat is required to activate the cannabinoids.
Yep.
And you said that they're also acid. Now, does the alkali in your blood or intestine make it active?
Oh, no, because that actually happens in the heating process. So by the time you ingest it, it's already had that acid part knocked off. And also, it's a little more complicated than that. When you're talking like acids and alkalis in that context, it's not an issue as to whether that's going to make what's in your body acid and alkali. Yes, when you're talking about the foods that you eat and what you drink, but generally the amount of acid or alkali would be involved in those sort of chemical sort of, I was thinking equations, not equations. Anyone who can think of the word, please jump in. Thank you. Formula, yeah. So basically, yeah, it's just not enough to matter. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of acid-alkali reactions that just don't impact on any biological process in our body, but it's just what has to happen for one stage of a chemical reaction to go to the next stage. So it's not always significant.
We've got another question.
Yes?
When growing cannabis, the pH of the soil.
Okay, you've got me. Ask a grower. I know it quite generally, but growing is probably not my forte. Anyway, so I thought you might like that one. It wasn't meant to be any sort of religious anything, I just thought it was a really good picture. Cannabis is a medicine. Cannabis is the safest substance known to man. The LD50 is how we measure toxicity. It's really, you know, how much of a substance it takes for half the mice to die. They have a lot of trouble measuring it for cannabis. So really, you just can't die from it. The reason for that is because there's no cannabis receptors in the brainstem. So it's impossible to die from it the way you can die from an opioid overdose. And yeah, it does have its side effects, like all medicines do, but the side effect profile is still actually quite favourable when you compare that even paracetamol can kill you. I think it's quite interesting that paracetamol, ibuprofen and aspirin are available in the supermarket and people die from them every year. Interesting, isn't it? Okay. But, like we touched on before, it depends on the synergy of the plant for its overall activity. And in the case of cannabis, it's called the Entourage Effect. And most of you will have heard of that. The Entourage Effect, it's in every herb that we have. It's called synergy. And it's where parts of the plant act together to make either something happen or not happen, or even different plants in combination acting together. Synergy can be within the plant or between plants. So because it is a whole plant medicine, you know, therefore really, and I mean it will, the characteristics of that medicine will vary from strain to strain, from medicine to medicine, depending on what you want and need. So it's a branch of medicine that must be individualised. And of course this is the big problem that conventional medicine has when it comes to cannabis medicine. They want their guidelines, they want their pharmaceutic cannabis, and they want instructions on how to use this. Instead of the simple truth being, and it's the patient that will tell you. You know, like, yes, we'd all like guidelines on where to start. You know, what regime do we use for cancer? What are the best strains to use for chronic pain? What sort of ratio is best for epilepsy? Why can't I use CBD in epilepsy? I thought I was supposed to be for epilepsy. Because they have this thing, oh, CBD's for epilepsy. Well, no, as time has gone on, we're starting to realise more and more that many children and adults require THC to control their seizures, and CBD is becoming problematic because it interacts with the anti-epileptic medications where CBD doesn't. So, you know, it's a whole new branch of medicine. Anyway, I could go on forever about that, and the amount we've all learned in 5 years is pretty extraordinary, but we're only at the beginning. I just want to push home the safety message. Cannabis, safer than the Catholic Church. Safer than your smartphone. Safer than family gatherings. I mean, we've just all done Christmas. So what can cannabis cure? Cannabis cures everything except stupidity. Yes. Why can cannabis cure? Well, because we have this thing called an endocannabinoid system. How many have heard of it? Okay, pretty good. How many know much about it? Right. That gives me somewhere to go. Okay. Excuse me, just pouring with sweat, you know. Menopause cancer really does terrible things to our sweat glands. It's a regulatory transmitter system. So it controls neurotransmitter levels. So we're looking at, you've heard of things like serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline, all of those sorts of things. All of those, they're examples of neurotransmitters. And in doing so, and in other indirect ways, controls homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is what keeps our bodies balanced. So a nice little analogy that I always like to use for the endocannabinoid system and what cannabinoids do in our body is that if we can imagine all of our neurotransmitter and body systems are like a graphic equaliser on a stereo and they're all sort of like this, well, the endocannabinoid system just tries to gently bring them back to the middle so that everything's all nice and in tune and in balance. It's a fine-tuning mechanism. And it does this in a very, very clever way because instead of, for example, if it's sort of an impulse is going along a nerve, and it reaches the junction where the next nerve is, or where the muscle joins on, either one. Then, so it leaps over there, but then the endocannabinoid receptor on the other side saying, hold on, hang on, that's too much. And then it actually sends the endogenous cannabinoid back over. It's like sending the boat back. So back over to make something happen on the other side. And that's the way fine-tuning happens in our bodies, by a thing we call retrograde transmission. I won't get into it anymore because it does get really complicated. So basically you do have to have an understanding of what receptor systems are too, is that, and it's not just neurotransmitters, it's virtually every chemical we have in our bodies, sodium, potassium, all of the other proteins that are used for various things in our body. They act like a key, and receptors on our cell membranes are like the locks. And when the key goes into the lock and turns it, something happens. And that's basically how our bodies work, by probably millions of keys all at the same time going into all these locks and turning and making things happen. And the endocannabinoid system is one of the main controllers of that. So, okay, and the receptors for the cannabinoids are actually found throughout the body, apart from the brainstem. But virtually we used to think, oh, well, you only get CB1 in the central nervous system, and you get CB2 in the immune system, the two different types of receptors. But now we know that while you may get more of the CB1 receptors in the nervous system, there are also CB2 receptors, and there's probably more. I think they're probably up to about 4 receptors but we still only have the information on 2. And the same with the endogenous cannabinoids, called anandamide and 2-AG, that the body produces itself. And so this is where, I don't know, you've probably seen a few memes on Facebook about breast milk. Absolutely. Cannabinoids are found in breast milk because the babies require endogenous cannabinoids to activate their endocannabinoid systems. So I think we will probably start to look at pregnancy and breastfeeding quite differently in the years to come when it comes to cannabis. I don't think that anything in huge amounts is good for anybody, but obviously the body requires endogenous cannabinoids in order to function, in order to develop and grow. So that's a very interesting watch this space, I think, is to what happens, with pregnancy and lactation, because cannabis would have to be one of the best things for morning sickness ever. And so, of course, that's why exogenous cannabinoids, opposite to endogenous, so the ones that are found outside, that's why they have such effects, because they actually they mimic the endogenous cannabinoids quite closely. The one difference is that in the body, the anandamide and 2-AG, they're produced only in response to when they're needed. So the levels are it's very hard to measure it. It floods into the synapse of the nerve and then dissipates. And that's why it took so long for them to find them as well. Because they don't last very long, whereas we know exogenous cannabinoids can last for 2 days if you overdose yourself. So, why can cannabis cure? Oh, we've already done that. I was going backwards. Okay, there's another chart for you. And that's one for all the medical uses, because I'm sure that you all know. Actually, I think we're just about near the end. And so I thought I'd just show you a few more cartoons. This is where we're discovering that in actual fact, the use of cannabis in the elderly may save them from a terrible opioid death. Types of cannabis medicine. As I said, I won't go into extraction or any more than just this. So you can get bud, so you smoke or vape that. You can, and like what's required, like for example, smoking and vaping is very good for short-acting pain relief as a rescue medication. Edibles, and the only restriction there, of course, is your imagination. And their edibles can replace oils and tinctures, but the dosage is a lot harder to really quantify. And it would be, you know, for example, if you've got a cancer patient and they can manage to get down a few nibbles of a cookie, then you'd do it like that, wouldn't you? So, as I said, it's really only limited by your imagination. So oils and tinctures are to be taken orally. Oils you can use rectally, and of course you can make those into suppositories. I wouldn't suggest a tincture up the bum, I can tell you. Put it this way, they'd be scraping off the ceiling from when the alcohol hits. And topicals, you can apply cannabis as well to the skin. And you can have it non-activated as well. Activated or non-activated, how stoned do you want to be? For cancer regimes, we try and gently tell people, well, I'm afraid you're going to have to be, because we need everything as activated as possible, and we need to give it to you in the biggest, highest doses for as long as you can tolerate it. But when you're looking at a child that you'd like to treat for autism or for epilepsy, or for other behavioural issues, indeed, then you'd really be wanting to look at the more non-activated forms. You know, how much, you know, can we just use the acid THC? Will that be enough? Do we have to add the psychoactive element? So again, it's all very individual. I mean, I think that any psychoactive substance in huge amounts may damage a developing brain. But when you're dealing with a child whose brain is being damaged by epilepsy anyway, and even more damaged by pharmaceutic drugs, then it's a risk-benefit thing that you've really got to look at. Is that I think if you ask the epileptic child if they were old enough, I know what they'd choose. You know, damage my brain with the cannabis, please. And indeed, that's what they are starting to say. So, you know, but it is a big issue. It's always going to be a big issue, is giving any psychoactive agent to minors. So, but there is something we can do. I mean, we can always start with a non-activated version first, or just CBD alone, and things like that. But what becomes patently obvious a lot of the time is that the activated THC is required. But again, you know, we're never going to kill anybody by trying. And we'll just finish up by pointing out a few little illogical things that we're up against here. Daddy, why is cannabis illegal? Well, son, legalising the cannabis plant could free us from oil dependence, stop deforestation, make a safe alternative to many pharmaceuticals, and would cause prisons to be shut down. Now, do you understand? And why is cannabis illegal again? And that just goes through the annual causes of death. See the one down the bottom? It says 0. Make it legal. The war on drugs intensifies. And that's what's happening in Australia. That's not really a cartoon, people. Sick people are being raided. Sick people are being arrested. Sick people are going to jail. Though that is starting to happen a little less, and I'm sure we'll all be interested in hearing Andrew Catalaris' story later. Just another little one. Okay, doc, step away from the mildly psychoactive weed or lose your licence to prescribe highly addictive and sometimes deadly opioids. If we tolerated your pot use, next we'd be legalising hemp, which would threaten my investments in synthetic fabrics, plastics, pesticides, oil. Prisoners said, I have no choice but to jail you for 30 years. So it looks like a lot of cartoonists have picked up on how illogical it is. And thank you very much for listening, everyone. Any questions? Yes.
We hear a lot
Here we are. Can we talk in the mic?
for cancer and chronic pain, etc. But, you know, there doesn't seem to be much information out there for replacement therapies, for quite standard treatments like aspirin therapy, etc. You know, a lot of people are prescribed aspirin therapy for keeping their blood thin. Cannabis does not have an anticoagulant action, right. But CBD is able to interact with some drugs that are metabolised by the same enzyme system in the liver,
and those include anticoagulants.
Right.
So we've tended to just keep away from the whole anticoagulation issue. I think there's many herbs that are actually quite, that do have an anticoagulant action. And yeah, you have to be careful with those if you're on anticoagulants, but it could not be used as a replacement anticoagulant therapy.
There is some evidence, though, that it can prolong your warfarin INR.
Yes, that's right, yep. So, and that's by, yep.
Hello, Dr. Sue. What do you say about digestive system problems like things like colitis and Crohn's? How does it just stop the pain, or is it?
Oh, look, honestly, it's one of the really encouraging areas for Crohn's and colitis, because though one little thing I'd say is that it really needs to be ingested. I think people with Crohn's and colitis can smoke or vape cannabis till the cows come home. It's not until they ingest the oil that they really start to see the effects. Or in the case of the girls down south, they got wonderful effects just with juicing. But I would say that to get the pain relieving effect, definitely, you'd need it activated. But both would probably help with the inflammation and the healing and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just myself, because I ended up getting colitis from one of the melanoma drugs, and for the first time managed to get rid of it just with oil and didn't have to have any steroids at all. So yay! So yes, we can use cannabis oil most definitely for Crohn's and colitis and other things. One more question. Is Michael ready for the next one?
Just have to hold it close to mouth.
Do you think we should leave that slide up all day? Oh, another question?
I've got a friend who has SIBO. I just wondered, she's actually also dealing with cancer. I just wondered if it would have any positive effects on SIBO disease.
What's SIBO again?
Small intestine. Is it a bowel obstruction?
Yeah, it's...
No. Leaky gut. Leaky...
Oh, right, okay. Right, I'm just looking in the wrong profession, that's all. Okay, yes, I understand what you mean now. Oh, God, look, it's never going to hurt, and it will really help because it's a vulnerary herb. It's a healing herb. But in actual fact, that can be dealt with herbal medicine. Like, there's more than one thing that can help that. You just really need a good naturopath or herbalist that can guide you with diet, with re-establishing the right microbiome, the microorganisms in your gut. And there's lots and lots of herbal medicines that are just so healing for the gut as well as cannabis. I would not be confining myself to one herb. Oh, yes, still keep doing that.
Hashimoto's and what's the other?
Absolutely.
So we can't hear. Hashimoto's and what? Osteoporosis.
Yeah, probably the osteoporosis will improve once she's able to absorb more things from her gut. Until that happens, the poor old bones don't really have a chance, do they? Because basically she's not getting enough calcium and not getting all of that stuff absorbed. So until the gut is healed, the rest of the body can't heal, really. And there are herbs for the thyroid too. And there's actually, I have heard, a really good thyroid clinic on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. That's, actually, yes. So I think, are we ready? Are we still asking questions?
I think, Michael, are we finished? We're finished.
Don't tell me I didn't talk long enough today, Michael.
I love that you finished talking.
You sound like my husband.